Salman Rushdie is an Indian-born English novelist and critic. I'm sure you've all heard of him and read his work. He's famous for fantastical novels about the post-colonial relationship between the cultures of the East and West. He was raised in India and Pakistan and educated in England, where he emigrated in 1965. He's a graduate of Cambridge University, and he worked as an actor and actually in advertising until the success of his second novel, Midnight's Children, which won the 1981 Booker Prize, allowed him to write full-time as a writer. He is an honorary professor in the humanities at MIT, so just down the street, a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. He was also awarded the Austrian State Prize for European Literature in 1993 and has received 8 honorary doctorates. He was elected to the Board of American Pen in 2002, and he has since published novels, short stories, essays about the cultural conventions between the East and West. He was made a Knight Bachelor in June of 2007, so congratulations. And please join me in welcoming Salman Rushdie to Google Table.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm collecting Googles at this stage. This is the 4th Google that I've spoken at in the last 3 months. So I was in New York and Mountain View and here, and there was even a Google seminar in just outside London that I took part in April. So I'm told the one I have to go to is in Geneva because you can go downstairs on a slide. So I have to add that to the list. But it's and this is the last event of my book tour. So after this, I can shut up forever. So I thought what I'd do is just talk to you and read to you a little bit about this new book, The Enchantress of Florence, and then we'll have time for questions, and you can ask about whatever you like, I guess. This novel is it's a bit different for me in that it's set in the 16th century entirely, and takes place between India at the height of the Mughal Empire, which ruled India really from the late 15th century until the late 17th century when the British started taking over. And at the middle of the 16th century was really the pinnacle of it under the great Emperor Akbar, who ruled India for the whole second half of the 16th century and was more or less an exact contemporary of Elizabeth I of England. On the other hand, Renaissance Florence, and it's a sort of journey novel in both directions between the two. And I just wanted to just make in your mind a little picture of this world, the pre-modern world, which is very different than it is now. If you go from east to west, you have to sort of ignore China and Japan at this stage because they were so sealed off from the rest of the world that they had very little interaction with it. In India, as I say, you have the Mughal Empire, very powerful in the 16th and 17th centuries. To the west of that, there was an area which was then called Khorasan, which we would call Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. And actually the Mughals originally came from that northern border between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan and gradually moved down to establish a kingdom in India. To the west of Khorasan was the Safavid Persian Empire, which was really the beginning of Shia Persia, just really beginning at this time. To the west of that was the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, and neighboring countries. The Ottomans had conquered Constantinople in 1453, and by this time, the early 16th century, had really consolidated their rule over that period, that region. And to the west of that was Europe. Europe in the middle of the Renaissance, a kind of high moment in European culture. Then you have this large expanse of water, which was at that point called the Ocean Sea. And to the west of the Ocean Sea, just bubbling up on the western horizon, was this strange thing that nobody knew quite what it was, called the New World. People didn't know if it was an island or India. Christopher Columbus lived and died thinking he'd got to India. In the novel, actually, the Emperor Akbar is rather irritated when he hears this and thinks, how the hell could you mistake that for India? India's much richer and more ancient culture, and what a stupid person you must have been. So that's really the world of the time, and as you can see, it's a pretty fraught world for anybody to try and travel across. For any man, much less a woman, and this is a novel about a woman who, through the problems of her life, the vicissitudes and choices of her life, makes her way west from the Mughal dynasty until she ends up in Florence, and she's a princess of the Mughal house. She gets captured by a warlord then he gets defeated by the Shah of Persia, then she becomes the lover of the Shah of Persia, and eventually when, I'm going to read you a bit about when he's defeated in battle by the Ottomans, she falls in love with this Italian soldier of fortune who's working at that point as a general in the Ottoman army, and he brings her back to Florence. And she creates lots of trouble, and she's probably a witch. So that's kind of what happens. And I just thought I'd read you the moment where the lovers meet, and which is actually at the scene of a battle that really happened, a very important battle at this period of the world, which happened on the Turkish-Persian border between the Ottoman Turks and the Persians, called the Battle of Chaldiran, a battle which really more or less established even the present-day border between Turkey and Iran. The cause of the battle, I tell you this by way of showing you how much of the really weird stuff in this book is completely true, and the tedious stuff is the stuff that I made up. And one example of the bizarre stuff is that it's true that at a certain point the Shah of Persia was fighting this warlord on his eastern frontier and defeated him in battle, killed him, chopped his body up, sent the body parts around the empire to prove that he was dead, kept the skull, set the skull with gold and jewels and turned it into a wine goblet, and used to drink from it every evening, and then had a better idea. Then he decided to send the wine goblet as a present to the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul, basically to say, this is what I just did to the warlord on my eastern frontier, and since you're the chap on my western frontier, I thought you might like to have a look. And the result of this was the Ottomans sent a colossal army to fight him. And so the moral of the story is, if you happen to come into possession of the skull of your enemy, don't send it to your more powerful enemy. Otherwise, you know, there might be trouble. Anyway, I thought I'd read you this bit, which is to do with, if I could find the place, which I've managed to lose, to do with, anyway, what happens at this, during the course of this battle, as you'll see, is the meeting of the lovers, and then it gets worse. But I've lost it. Hang on. Here we are. Oh, I should also explain about tulips. There's some tulips in this passage, and that people may not know that tulips actually originated in Turkey, where they were crazy about them and thought they were good luck charms in some cases and so on, and they spread away from that. There's a part of this passage which I'm sorry to say is obscene, involving obscene tulips, but I'll warn you about that before we get there. So this is the Spanish, not sorry, Spanish, you can tell it's late in the book tour, the Italian soldier of fortune who was basically, he was an orphan who went out into the world to seek his fortune, discovered he was good at fighting. At this point, as I say, he's working as one of the commanders of the Ottoman army. He's called Antonino Argalia, and he's now no longer a child, he's now in middle age. Argalia's 45th birthday had come and gone. He was a tall, pale man, and in spite of the years of war, his skin was as white as a woman's. Men and women alike marveled at its softness. He was a lover of tulips and had them embroidered onto his tunics and cloaks, believing them to be bringers of good fortune. And of the 1,500 varieties of Stamboul tulip, 6 in particular were to be found thronging his palace rooms: the light of paradise, the matchless pearl, the increaser of pleasure, the instiller of passion, the diamond's envy, and the rose of the dawn. These were his favorites, and by them he was revealed as a sensualist beneath his warrior's exterior, a creature of pleasure hiding inside a killer's skin, a female self within the male. He had too a woman's taste for finery. When not in battle dress, he lounged in jewels and silks, and had a great weakness for exotic furs, the black fox and lynx of Muscovy, which came down to Stamboul through the Crimea. His hair was long and black as evil, and his lips were full and red as blood. Well, there's a passage I'll just skip, but it's to do with when the old sultan dies, his sons go to war for the succession, and he takes sides and manages to get rid of, i.e. kill, one of the sons and the Grand Vizier, at which point he becomes the new sultan's commander-in-chief. After that, the new sultan, by the way, is called Selim the Grim. This is, again, that's what he was really called. Proud of it, he liked to be called Selim the Grim. And he was grim. After that, the main problems came from the Shiite people of Anatolia. They wore red hats with 12 pleats to show their fondness for Twelver Shiism, and as a result they were attracted to the Shia Shah Ismail of Persia, the self-styled very god. Salim the Grim wanted to crush them utterly, but his father was more restrained, his father being the former sultan. So, of course, they depose and exile father, who dies of a broken heart on the way, which was just as well. The world has no room for men who have lost their nerve. Salim, with Argalia at his side, hunted down and strangled all his brothers and killed their sons as well. Order was restored, and the risk of a coup eliminated. Then it was time to face Shah Ismail. Argalia and his Janissaries, do you know about Janissaries? Janissaries were like the Marines of the Ottoman army. They were a very feared fighting force, often composed of former slaves and captives retrained to become these crack troops. Argalia and his Janissaries were sent to Rum in north-central Anatolia, arrested thousands of Shia residents and slaughtered thousands more. That kept the bastards quiet while the army marched across their land to deliver Salim the Grim's letter to the Shah. In this message, Salim said, "You no longer uphold the commandments and prohibitions of the divine law. You have incited your abominable Shiite faction to unsanctified sexual union, and you have shed innocent blood." 100,000 Ottoman soldiers made camp at Lake Van in eastern Anatolia on the way to push these words down Shah Ismail's blasphemous throat. Among their ranks were 12,000 Janissary musketeers under Argalia's command. There were also 500 cannons chained together to form an impassable barrier. The battlefield of Chaldiran was to the northeast of Lake Van, and there the Persian forces made their stand. Shah Ismail's army was only 40,000 men strong, almost all of them cavalrymen. But Argalia, surveying their battle array, knew that superior numbers did not always decide a fight. Ismail had used a scorched earth strategy. Anatolia was bare and charred, and the advancing Ottomans found little to eat or drink. Salim's army was tired and hungry when it camped by the lake after its long march, and such an army is always beatable. Afterwards, when Argalia was with the princess, she told him why her erstwhile lover had been defeated. "Chivalry," she said, "foolish chivalry, and listening to some stupid nephew of his, and not to me." The extraordinary fact is that the Enchantress of Persia, along with her slave, the Mirror, was present on the command hill above the field of battle, her thin veiling garment blowing against her face and breasts in the breeze so suggestively that her body's beauty turned the Safavid soldiers' thoughts entirely away from war. "He must have been mad to bring you," Argalia told her, when, blood-filthy and kill-sick, he found her abandoned at the death-heavy end of the day. "Yes," she said, matter-of-factly, "I drove him mad with love." However, in the matter of military strategy, not even her enchantments could make him heed her. "Look," she cried, "they're still building their defensive fortifications. Attack now when they're not ready." And, "Look," she cried, "they have 500 cannons chained in a line and 12,000 riflemen behind. Don't just gallop at them head on or you'll be cut down like fools." And, "Don't you have guns?" You know about guns. For pity's sake, why didn't you bring any guns? To which the Shah's nephew, Durmish Khan the fool, answered, "It would not be sportsmanlike to attack them when they are not ready to fight. And it would not be noble to send our men to attack them from the rear. And the gun is not a weapon for a man. The gun is for cowards who do not dare to fight at close quarters. Yet however many guns they have, we will take the fight to them until it is hand to hand. Courage will win the day, and not these arquebuses and muskets." She turned to Shah Ismail in a kind of laughing despair. "Tell this man he is an idiot," she commanded him. But Shah Ismail of Persia answered, "I am not a caravan thief to go skulking in the shadows. Whatever is decreed by God will occur." She refused to watch the battle, sitting instead inside the royal tent with her face turned away from the door. The Mirror sat beside her and held her hand. Shah Ismail led a charge down the right wing that smashed the Ottoman left, but the Enchantress had turned away her face. Both armies suffered terrible losses. The Persian cavalry cut down the flower of the Ottoman horsemen, the Illyrians, the Macedonians, the Serbians, the Epeirots, Thessalians, and Thracians. On the Safavid side, the commanders fell one by one, and as they died, the Enchantress in her tent murmured their names: Muhammad Khan Ustajlu, Hussein Beg Lala Ustajlu, Saru Pirao Stajlu, and so on, as if she could see everything without looking. And the mirror reflected her words, so that the names of the dead seemed to echo in the royal tent. Amir Nizamuddin Abdul Baqi, al-Baqi. But the name of the Shah, who believed himself to be God, was not spoken. The Ottoman center held, but the Turkish cavalry was on the verge of panic when Argalia ordered the artillery to be brought up. "You bastards," he screamed at his own janissaries, "if any of you try to run, I'll turn the fucking cannons on you." His Swiss giants, armed to the teeth, ran on foot along the Ottoman battle line to add emphasis to his threats. Then the thunder of the guns began. "The storm has started," the Enchantress said, sitting in her tent. "The storm," the mirror replied. There was no need to look as the Persian army died. It was time to sing a sad song. Shah Ismail was alive, but the day was lost. He had fled the battlefield wounded without coming for her. She knew it. "He is gone," she told the mirror. "Yes, he is gone," the other assented. "We are at the enemy's mercy," the Enchantress said. "Mercy," the mirror replied. The men posted outside the tent to guard them had run away as well. They were two women alone on a field of dreadful blood. That was how Argalia found them, sitting unveiled and straight-backed and alone, facing away from the door of the royal tent at the end of the Battle of Chaldiran and singing a sad song. The Princess Karakoz turned to face him, making no attempt to shield the nakedness of her features from his gaze, and from that moment on they could only see each other and were lost to the rest of the world. He looked like a woman, she thought, like a tall, pale, black-haired woman who had glutted herself on death. How white he was, as white as a mask, upon which, like a bloodstain, those red, red lips. A sword in his right hand and a gun in his left. He was both things, swordsman and shootist, male and female, himself and his shadow as well. She abandoned Shah Ismail as he had abandoned her, and chose again, this pale-faced woman-man. Afterwards he would claim her and her mirror as spoils of war, and Selim the Grim would agree. But she had chosen him long before that, and it was her will that moved everything that followed. "Don't be afraid," he said in Persian. "Nobody in this place knows the meaning of fear," she replied, first in Persian and then again in Chaghtay, her Turkic mother tongue. And beneath those words, the real words, "Will you be mine? Yes, I am yours." So they go back to Istanbul and they become lovers, and this, I'm sorry to say, is the obscene tulip part. When she undressed Argalia and found tulips embroidered on his underclothes, she understood that he was addicted to his superstitions, that like any man whose work is death, he did what he could to ward off the last day. When she removed his undergarments and found them tattooed on his shoulder blades and buttocks, and even on the thick shaft of his penis, she knew for certain that she had met the love of her life. "You don't need those flowers anymore," she told him, caressing them. "Now you have me instead to be your good luck charm." He thought, "Yes, I have you, but only until I don't. Only until you choose to leave me as you left your sister, to change horses again as you changed from Shah Ismail to me. A horse is only a horse, after all." She read his mind, and seeing that he needed further reassurances, she clapped her hands. The mirror came into the flower-heavy bedchamber. "Tell him who I am," she said. "She is the lady who loves you," the mirror said. "She can charm the snakes from the ground and the birds from the trees and make them fall in love, and she has fallen in love with you, so now you can have anything you desire." The Enchantress made a small movement of her eyebrow, and the mirror let her clothes fall to the floor and slipped into the bed. "She is my mirror," the Enchantress said. "She is the shadow that shines. Who wins me gets her as well." At this point, Argalia, the great warrior, admitted defeat. In the face of such an outflanking assault, the only course left to a man was unconditional surrender. For many years, he'd had the honor of being permitted, as a recipient of the Sultan's favor, to live in chambers in the abode of bliss, the Topkapi Palace, instead of the Spartan accommodation at the Janissary barracks. Now that the chambers had the added grace of a woman's touch, they began to feel like a true home. But home was always a troubled, dangerous idea for men like Argalia to allow themselves to believe in. It could catch at them like a noose. Salim the Grim did not think of him as his indispensable right-hand man, but as a probable and dangerous rival for power, a popular general who could lead his janissaries into the inner sanctum of the palace, just as he'd done once before when he killed the Grand Vizier. A man capable of murdering the Vizier was also capable of regicide. Such a man had perhaps outlived his usefulness. As soon as they were back in Istanbul, the Sultan, while publicly lavishing praise on his Italian commanding officer for his part in the famous victory of Chaldiran, began secretly to plot Argalia's destruction. News of Argalia's precarious position came to his ears because of Karakoz's decision to continue to satisfy his love of tulips. There were gardens all round the abode of bliss, walled gardens and sunken gardens, woodland areas where deer wandered freely, and waterside lawns sloping down to the Golden Horn. The tulip beds were to be found on the low hill at the northern end of the Topkapi complex, the highest point in the entire abode of bliss, where there were small wooden pleasure pavilions called kiosks. The tulips grew around them in great numbers and created an air of fragrant serenity and peace. The Princess Karakoz and her mirror, demurely veiled, often walked in these gardens and rested in the kiosks, drinking sweet juices, speaking gently to the many palace bostanchis, the gardeners, to get them to gather flowers for Lord Argalia, and to prattle idly as women will about the innocent gossip of the day. Soon all the garden staff, from the lowliest weed puller to the head gardener himself, were deeply enamored of the two ladies, and consequently loose-tongued, as only true lovers are. Many of them remarked how swiftly the two foreign ladies had become proficient in the Turkish language. Almost overnight, or so it seemed. As if by magic, the gardeners said. But Karakoz's true purposes were far from innocent. She knew, as all new residents of the abode of bliss quickly came to know, that the 1001 bostanchis were not only the Sultan's gardeners, but his official executioners as well. If a woman was convicted of a crime, it was a bostanchi who sewed her still alive into a sack weighted down with stones and threw her into the Bosphorus. If a man was to be killed, a group of gardeners grabbed him and performed an act of ritual strangulation. So Karakoz befriended the bostanchis and learned what they called, with dark humor, the tulip news. And soon enough the stink of betrayal began to overpower the fragrance of the flowers. The gardeners warned her that her lord, the great general, the servant of 3 sultans, was in danger of being tried on trumped-up charges and sentenced to death. The head gardener himself told her so. The Bostanchi Basha of the abode of bliss was the sultan's executioner-in-chief, chosen not only for his horticultural skills, but also for his running speed, because when a grandee of the court was condemned to death, he was given a chance not granted to common men. If he could outrun the Bostanchi Basha, he could live. His sentence would be commuted to banishment. But the Bostanchi Basha was famous for being able to run like the wind, so the chance was really no chance at all. On this occasion, however, the gardener was not happy about what he would have to do. To execute such a great man would make me feel ashamed, he said. Then, said the enchantress, we must find a way out of the situation, if we can. He will kill you soon, she came home and told Argalia. The gardens are full of rumor. On what pretext, I wonder, he said gravely. The princess took his pale face in her hands. I am the pretext, she said. You have taken a Mughal princess as a spoil of war. He did not know that when he gave you leave, but he knows it now. To capture a Mughal princess is an act of war against the Mughal king. And he will say, by placing the Ottoman Empire in such a position, you have committed treason and must pay the price. Such is the news the tulips have to tell. Forewarned, Argalia had time to make plans, and on the day they came for him, he had already sent Karakoz and the mirror under cover of night, along with the treasure chests holding the wealth he had amassed on many successful military campaigns, and in the company of his 4 Swiss giants and the entire company of his most loyal janissaries, some 100 men in all, to wait for him at Bursa to the south of the capital. If I run away with you, he said, Salim will hunt us down and murder us like dogs. Instead, I must stand trial, and after I am condemned, I must win the gardener's race. It was what Karakoz had known he would say. If you are determined to die, she told him, I suppose I will have to allow it. By which she meant she would have to save his life. And it would be hard because she would not be present at the scene of the great race. As soon as Salim the Grim, in the throne room of the abode of bliss, pronounced the sentence of death on the traitor Argalia, the warrior, knowing the rules, spun on his heel and began to run. From the throne room to the fish house gate, it was about half a mile through the palace gardens. And he had to get there before the Bostanchi Basha in his red skull cap, white muslin breeches and bare chest, who was already in hot pursuit and gaining on him with every stride. If he was caught, he would die at the fish house and be thrown into the Bosphorus where all the dead bodies went. As he ran between the flower beds, he saw the fish house gate ahead, heard the footsteps of the Bostanchi Basha close behind him, and knew that he could not run fast enough to escape. Life is absurd, he thought, to survive so many wars and then be strangled by the gardener. Truly, as it said, there are no heroes who do not learn the emptiness of heroism before they die. He remembered how, as a young boy, he had first discovered the absurdity of life, abandoned alone in a small rowboat in the middle of a battle in a fog. All these years later, he thought, I'm having to learn the lesson all over again. No satisfactory explanation was ever given of why Sultan Salim the Grim's fleet-footed head gardener suddenly fell down, clutching his stomach, just 30 paces from the end of the gardener's race, or why he then succumbed to a bout of the foulest farting anyone had ever smelled, releasing blasts of wind as loud as gunshots and crying out in pain like an uprooted mandrake, while Argalia ran past the finishing post at the fish house gate, mounted the horse waiting for him, and galloped on into exile. "Did you do something?" Argalia asked his beloved when he met her at Bursa. "What could I have done? To my dear little Basha," she answered, wide-eyed. "To send him a message? Thanking him in advance for slaying you, my vile abductor? Along with a jug of Anatolian wine to demonstrate my gratitude? That is one thing, yes. But to calculate exactly how long a certain potion stirred into the wine would take before it had its effect on his stomach, why, that would be quite impossible, of course." When he looked into her eyes, he saw no indication of any subterfuge there, no sign that she, or her mirror, or both of them together, might have done anything to persuade the gardener to fail in his duty, perhaps even to take the drink at a time specified in advance, in return for a moment of bliss that would last such a man a lifetime. No, Argalia told himself as Karakos's eyes drew him deeply into their spell. Nothing of that sort could have happened. Behold the eyes of my beloved, how guileless they are, how full of love and truth. Thank you. All right. Well, so then they make it to Italy and things get worse. So, all right, well, we have time for questions, of course, and I guess you should just stand up and shout. I don't know, maybe do I have to repeat the questions so that people can hear them, or?
If you could,
Yeah, all right, I'll do that. All right. So, anybody? Or we'll just sit here. Yes.
I guess given that a lot of your novels veer towards historical fiction, how do you begin and continue your research process?
The question is about, given that a lot of the books have to do with history, how do I do the research? Well, some of them require a lot of research and some of them not so much. I mean, you're right that there's an interest I've always had in how human beings interact with the historical events of their time, and you know, the great question is, do we make history or does it unmake us? You know, are we able to shape our times, or are we just the victims of what goes on? And I mean, those are questions that I think I will often try to explore in different ways. Some of the history is pretty much contemporary history. I mean, for instance, in Midnight's Children, the partition of India, I mean, I was born 8 weeks before the partition of India, so that's not ancient history, and if you grew up in India, it was very much, you know, part of what we grew up with, so the amount of research required was relatively small, and it was more fact-checking, really, than research. I mean, one of the things I've learned about that is that the place where you make a mistake is always the place where you think you know everything. And if you think, oh, I don't need to check that because I know that, that's where the mistake is. If you think you know a poem and you can quote it without looking it up, you always misquote it. And so you learn the hard way not to make that mistake. Midnight Still and Shame, I mean, those books didn't require much more than just fact-checking. Because that was they was written about a period that I knew a lot about already because I'd lived through it. Other books require much more. I mean, when I wrote Shalimar the Clown, for example, the novel before this one, I mean, I thought if you're going to set a part of your novel during the Nazi occupation of France in Strasbourg and elsewhere, then you better find out about it. And so I did a lot of reading for that. And actually, the reading was very helpful. I mean, for instance, it gave me something I would never have made up. For instance, there's a moment in the novel where one of the characters, Max, escapes from the Nazis in a plane called the Bugatti Racer. And the Bugatti factory was actually just outside Strasbourg, and I discovered that Mr. Bugatti had become very annoyed just before the war by the fact that a German plane, a Messerschmitt, had broken the world speed record. And he decided it was quite wrong that a German should have the speed record. So he decided to build a faster plane. He built this thing called the Bugatti Racer. And then France fell and the Nazis conquered it, and he hid the plane. And the Nazis never found it. He hid it all the way through. And actually it's now in an aircraft museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. But the sad thing about the plane is that the general judgment of it is that if it had flown, it would have broken the world record, but it was never given the chance to fly because they said never flew. So I thought I would let it fly. And so in my novel, he escapes the Nazis in it, and it's very fast. So there are moments when research just gives you stuff like a gift, because I needed for him to escape, you know, and I was finding all kinds of escape routes. I was reading about how the French resistance got people out, and you know, very interesting in itself, the kind of system that was set up to get people out of Nazi occupation. But then I found this plane, and that was much better. It's kind of much more glamorous. And this book I think required more research than I've ever done, because I had to find out not just about Renaissance Florence, not just about Mughal India, but as that passage suggests you, everything in between. You know, so it was. I mean, there's a long bibliography at the end for people who want to read more about this period. But I mean, the thing is, when you say research, it sounds like work. You know, I mean, actually, it wasn't work. It was extraordinarily enjoyable. I found out all this crazy stuff, like the wine goblet from the skull and so on, and plenty of other things. I mean, there's a moment near the passage where I read, which I didn't read to you, which is also when she's traveling through the Ottoman world, when I discovered that exactly at the right time for my purposes, the Ottomans were fighting a war against Dracula. You know, I mean, really, Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, the dragon. And the moment where I realized I could have Dracula in my novel, kind of, you know, without cheating, you know, I thought I'd gone to heaven, you know. So research can give you all kinds of stuff like that, which makes it very good fun. And it's kind of the wrong word, research. It was more exploration and learning, as I discovered that, you know, the old saying about truth being stranger than fiction is that a lot of the stuff that I found out I wouldn't have dared to make up, you know, such as that, Dracula, for example. I mean, two interesting things about Dracula. Well, you know, he wasn't a vampire, it wasn't really, but he was unbelievably bloodthirsty, and maybe a little vampirism would have been light relief on the whole, given the amount of killing he did do. But the important thing is he was not the Prince of Transylvania. I mean, this is Bram Stoker made this up. Romania has two provinces. The northern province is Transylvania. The southern province is Wallachia. And he was actually the Prince of Wallachia, which is the thing which has a common border with the Ottomans, and that's why the battle. So Transylvania, no. Vampires, no. Incredibly nasty, yes. But that's, I mean, so it's like that. It's messy, you know. But the thing that is important when doing research for a novel is that what you need to find out is not so much the big history. You know, the big history is relatively easy to get. You read a couple of books and you know what happened and when, and who was Pope and what battles were fought. So that's not hard. What's hard is ordinary life, to find out how people actually spent their day and what did they eat and what did they wear and what games did they play, and if they went out drinking, what did they drink, and if they lost their temper with each other, what terms of abuse did they use. You know, that's what you need in order to make a story come alive. And so you look for those very specific things. I now have in my computer files containing long lists of 16th century Italian swear words. which I intend to start employing because nobody knows what they mean. So, so you could be. Yeah, I could. I might get there in a minute. But they're very obscene, and yet they're in Italian, so they sound kind of cool. So, anyone else? Yes, at the back. Yeah, I mean the question is that that the questioner says that until recently all he knew about me was the question of the Satanic Verses and the fatwa and its consequences, and yeah, I mean I think it has been the albatross around my neck really. I mean it's been over now for longer than it went on for, it went on for long enough. I mean that period of danger and trouble was 9 years or so, and it's been over now for almost 10. So to me it feels like an earlier chapter of my life, and one that I'd prefer not to revisit if possible. But of course to many people, well certainly to people who've not read anything I've written, it's the thing that they most obviously know about me because it was such a big news event. And I think I do have to try and persuade people to see beyond that. And because I think that the main lasting damage that thing did to people's perceptions of me as a writer is that somehow people's perceptions of that event got transposed onto what my writing must be like. That because the event was, not funny, my books must not be funny. Because the event was kind of arcane and incomprehensible and theological, my books must be arcane and incomprehensible and theological. And so I think for a lot of people who'd never read my work and who all they knew about was the fatwa and its consequences, they thought, well, I don't want to read that book. I mean, what would it would be difficult to read, and I'm not relevant and alien to me. And I think it actually put people off. So I have to sort of fight back against that, And I think all I can do is go on doing my stuff, I mean, when I published the Satanic Verses, that was my fifth book. It was my fourth novel. This is my 13th book, my 10th novel. So it just feels to me as a writer that that's a really long time ago. I mean, it's 20 years in September since the first publication of the Satanic Verses. It's 25 years since I started writing it. And truthfully, I can barely remember what it was like to write it. And so when people ask me about it, I kind of have to make it up. There's a very funny story like this about my friend Harold Pinter, the playwright, who a few years ago he's also a very good actor, Harold. He's actually started out in his career as an actor. And there was a revival of his play No Man's Land, which happened in London, where the original production had Ralph Richardson, John Gielgud, and then there was this revival in which Harold took one of the two main parts. And a friend of mine was the director of it, who told me this very funny story that during the course of the rehearsals, the other actor who was playing the other main part had been puzzled and had said to Harold, he said, Harold, this little bit here, he said, I kind of don't get it. Can you explain to me what am I supposed to be doing here? How should this scene go? And Harold had a look at it, handed it back, and he said, the author's intentions are not clear from the text. And I remember, so some time after that, I said to her, Harold, did you really do that? I mean, wouldn't it have just been easier to tell him? And he said the same thing that I'm saying. He said, I wrote that play 25 years ago. How the fuck do I know? So this is what happens. You get to the point where you forget your own work. And it's sometimes easier for other people to talk about it than you, And in the case of the Satanic Verses, I mean, one of the strange things about it is that so many people have wanted to go on talking about it that I'm obliged to. I mean, obviously, I have a kind of way of talking about it. I can talk about it, but the actual day-to-day experience of writing that book, I really don't remember. So I only remember little bits of. And why did I do this or that? I mean, beats me, Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Do you think book reading will dwindle away to nothing, or do you think it would sort of appear permanently?
No. I think Google will dwindle away to nothing long before books. I mean, no, books are a very, very resilient form. I mean, and the death of the book has been forecast almost since the birth of the book. Everything was supposed to kill books. Radio was supposed to kill books. Movies were supposed to kill books. Television was supposed to kill. Everything's supposed to kill books. And yet they obstinately don't die. I think there's, it's actually a very sophisticated technology. Books, you can drop it in the bath, and it retains all its data. You can get sand in it, and it functions just as well. There's all kinds of things that you could scribble all over it, and it doesn't in any sense damage its operation. So it's very interactive. There's all kinds of ways in which this is not at all a dead technology. It's a very sophisticated technology which is actually geared rather well to how people like to read. You like to read in bed, you like to read on the beach, everywhere people like to read. This is a very comfortable way of doing it. What I think will happen is that certain things will change. I have no doubt that things like the Amazon Kindle will be successful, especially I think for traveling. If you want to go on vacation and take 10 books with you and there it is, and doesn't take up any room in your bags, I can see why people might want to do that. Although how pleasurable it is to read on that little thing, I'm not sure. I haven't done it, so maybe it's all right. But people speak well of it, actually. So I'm sure it'll work in that way. And I have a feeling that certain kinds of book will be replaced by electronic versions. I think especially, things, let's say encyclopedias, for example. I think actually it's easier to use Britannica online than to use the Britannica, because if for no other reason than the search engine. So there are things where you can see that it's actually natural that things should progress into a kind of electronic version and be improved by it. So some books, I think some books will be replaced by electronic versions. I just think that it's an obstinate form. I think there's a reason why it's survived so many hundreds of years through so many different generations of new technologies, and it's because people like it. It's for a start beautiful. There's also that. People like having books in their houses. It makes their houses feel nicer. So the old saying of books do furnish a room, they do. There are many reasons, I think, why books are very resilient and attractive, but there's no doubt that it will change. I think actually newspapers are in more danger than books, and I think newspaper people think so too. Every newspaper person I know is absolutely terrified about the future of newspaper print media. Those may well be, doomed, but this little old thing, I suspect, will see us all out. Yes.
How has technology changed the experience for you as a writer when you actually start?
Yeah. How has technology changed the experience for me as a writer is the question. I think, quite a lot. I was quite a late convert to the computer. I was worried that it would do something weird to my writing style, and I wasn't certain about it. So the first novel I wrote mainly on a computer was The Moor's Last Sigh, which was published in 1995, so I wrote it. So 1992, 93 is where I started, the first time I owned a computer, and that's relatively late. But I'm a complete convert, and I do both things. I revise on I write directly. What I tend to do is I make most of my notes longhand in notebooks, but when I'm actually writing, I tend to do it on what used to be called typing, and what is now on a computer screen, because I've always found that if it's in my handwriting, I don't know if it's any good or not. I can't be objective about it in my own script. I either think it's better than it is, or I think it's worse than it is. But I can't really. I have to look at it in something that looks like type before I can be objective about it. And what I find is that the things you see that are wrong on a computer screen are slightly different than the things you see that are wrong when you print it out and look at it. And so I tend to do both things. I tend to print out and scribble all over it, but I also edit directly on the screen. And of course, the great merit is that you can have different versions side by side and look at them and so on. And as a research tool, it's extraordinary. For this book, for example, the part of the novel that's set in 16th century India during the reign of the Emperor Akbar, well, the primary sources for that period are essentially three contemporary histories, very, very long contemporary histories, almost day by day, that were written in Persian by court historians at the time. And there are translations, but if it were not for the computer, the internet. One would have to go to a library and get out these enormous ancient translations and fight your way through them and make your notes and take them away. And that, I think, but now there's a very good academic website called Persian Texts in Translation, which gives you full text translations of all these books, which are just right there. Click, there they are. And so I could actually have the original text on the left-hand side and my page on the right-hand side and just refer like that, you know. And it probably saved me 6 months or more than 6 months, you know, just that one single thing. Yeah, I mean, it was invaluable. You know, for instance, there's a scene in the novel which takes place on the Italian coast in Genoa when they're arriving in Italy, and the local kind of military strongman was an admiral called Andrea Doria, who's since been more associated with the name of a ship that sank. But originally he was a famous admiral of the period, and he had this villa right on the shore, which he used to use to sort of survey what was going on in the bay and so on. And it's a famous villa which I've been to. It's very beautiful and large. But I wanted to have some reference to it. And again, there's an academic website which gave me, in like 3 seconds, floor plan of the villa, photographs of it, descriptions of which wings were built on where, pictures, descriptions of what works of art were in it, etc. I mean, like 10 times as much as I needed for the couple of paragraphs of the novel that were going to take place there. So yeah, I mean, absolutely essential. I mean, and that's why the bibliography at the end of the book, for the first time, actually includes references to websites as well as to books, because they were just necessary. I mean, you know, as we all know, the Wikipedia is a problem because you can't trust it. So anything you find out there, you have to check somewhere else anyway. You know, so yeah, yeah. The question is, how do I choose the language to reflect things like the Italian swear words? How do I translate the language of that time into this time? I mean, there isn't a rule really. The question, it's a good question, because there's a problem of using too much contemporary slang because it seems anachronistic in the mouths of the people that you're putting it into. On the other hand, clearly, they were not speaking classical Italian. They were speaking a kind of slang. And so it would also be wrong to make the speech too formal, you know. And so you have to invent, you know, what's called an idiolect. You have to invent a way for them to speak, which is neither classical nor too anachronistically contemporary, which feels like slang, you know, but which essentially you make up. But you make it up in a way to sound convincing, you know. So you have to it's trial and error, really, is how you do it. There isn't really a laid down way of doing it. You just have to see whether it sounds right or not. You know, sometimes you have to just feel whether, because clearly you could use anachronism deliberately. I mean, if you want to make somebody sound a certain way, you can put an excessively modern phrase in their mouth, you know, but you have to be conscious that you're doing it on purpose, you know, and so these effects it's very difficult to say how you achieve these effects. It's mostly trial and error and using your ear and your instinct. Saying, okay, does this work? Does it sound okay? And you try it out to other people. You know, I think everybody needs a few honest readers. You know, and I think, I mean, you don't need a lot of them, but because that's too much honesty. but you need 3 or 4 who are going to tell you this doesn't sound right, etc. And I have 1 or 2 of those, yeah.
So I've never read any of your books, so which one do I start with?
I don't know, try this one. Any writer will always talk to you about reading his most recent book, because it's the one that you feel most immediately connected to. You know, you could try this one, or you could start with the other end. You could read Midnight's Children. I mean, people seem to like that. So there's a couple of options. If you have a 10-year-old child, you could try Haroun and the Sea of Stories, which you might both enjoy. Well, anything above 7, really. I mean, that's a book that I wrote for my son when he was little. I mean, he's now grown up, but and he liked it. So, he didn't initially, actually. When I was writing it, I showed him the first like 2 or 3 chapters just to make sure that I was on the right lines, you know. And I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Yeah, yes, I like it." He said, "Some people might be bored." he said, not me, of course. I mean, I'd read it, but, but some people might be bored. And I thought, little bastard. I thought, why? I said, politely. He used this wonderful phrase. He said, I don't think it's got enough jump in it. Jump? I said. Yeah, he said, not enough jump in it. I thought, I can do jump, give me that, But took it away and rewrote it and showed it to him again. I said, now? He said, yeah, now it's all right. I mean, it was actually, in many ways, it was the best editorial criticism I ever got. And of course, is the great thing about children is that they are completely honest because they don't know how to dissemble, so they tell you exactly what they think, and it's incredibly helpful. Well, I'm glad I got it right. Otherwise, goodness knows what it would be like without enough jump. Over there, yeah.
What contemporary writers of history do you enjoy reading, both fiction and nonfiction?
Contemporaries of history, do I like reading?
Generally speaking.
Or just generally? Well, I mean, I do. I tend to not sit there reading history, except when it's for a specific purpose. So I mean, I need to find out something that I'm going to write about. So, I mean, I like David McCulloch, but it's no trick to say you like David McCulloch because everybody likes David McCulloch. I like some of Gore Vidal's historical novels. I mean, I particularly liked the earlier ones, the Burr and Lincoln. I thought were really very good books. I like a lot of books that engage with history. I mean, one of the great novels, I think, of the post-war European period was Günter Grass's novel, The Tin Drum, which, if you want to have, or not just The Tin Drum, but the trilogy of which it's a part, The Tin Drum, Cat and Mouse, and Dog Ears, the so-called Danzig trilogy. And if you want to read about what it was like to be a German under Nazism, it's the best thing ever written. And yet it's highly imaginative, it's kind of fabulous. And I admire it enormously, that little group of books. No, I mean, there's so much about it. There's this Italian novel called The Garden of the Finzi Continis, which is, again, if you talk about Nazism, it's a kind of novel about what it was like to be an Italian Jew in the time of Mussolini, and made into a very good film, actually. It's a long list. Yes. Oh, if I could be anywhere else, where would I be? When would I be? And who would I be? What? I have to tell you that I get asked this question occasionally, and the reason that I think I would not like to live in another period, in spite of all the problems of this one, is medicine. Imagine 16th century dentistry. Or actually, you don't want to imagine it. I mean, the Renaissance, all these times, they're wonderful periods to live in as long as you're healthy. The moment you stop being healthy, God help you. I mean, toothache, forget about it. So I think, on the whole, being a great coward about pain, I would much rather be where there's Novocaine. and things like that. So I'll settle for the 21st century, I think. And writing, I mean, I've never had another plan. I mean, yes, it'd be good to be absolute ruler of the whole of India. I would take that job. I wouldn't mind, the Emperor Akbar, that sounds like a good gig. But on the whole, I mean, writing is more or less the only thing I ever wanted to do. And I did have a teenage or undergraduate ambition to be an actor, and actually at university I did quite a lot of student acting, and even after I left college I did some acting in London, but I mean, really, I don't think I was good enough, and I think it became clear to me quite early on that I probably wasn't good enough. Acting is perhaps the only profession I can think of that's actually harder than writing, because you can't generate it yourself. You have to wait for somebody to come to you and offer you something. So I think I was probably wise not to pursue that route. And so, I'll settle for this. Thanks. You can probably have another question or two, yes.
So since you said this is the end of the book tour, have you started writing something new or making plans?
Have I started writing something new? Well, I am making plans, yes. And actually, I think I have to write another of these children's books, because I now have another 11-year-old son who's aware of the fact that I wrote a book for his brother. and for a while now he's been saying, so where's my book? And I managed to stall him by telling him I had to finish this book, otherwise we couldn't pay the rent. But I did say to him that after I'd finished with it, I'd try and have a go at another one. So I think that's what I have to do next, or else. Yeah. Right, that's last question over here. Thank you.
Do you travel much as part of your research?
Do I travel much as part of the research? Yes, is the answer. Yeah, I mean, Fatehpur Sikri, the Mughal capital, is this extraordinary place, which if any of you go to India, I strongly recommend you go to, because it's one of the most beautiful sites in India. And it's just outside Agra where the Taj Mahal is. Everybody goes to see the Taj. And nobody realizes, or many people don't realize, that just 1 hour's drive outside Agra is this extraordinary site of this abandoned capital city. It's this red sandstone, magnificent red sandstone city that was abandoned for reasons that nobody's entirely sure about. I mean, they built it and they abandoned it only 14 years after they built it. And it seems most likely that they did it because the water supply ran out. There used to be this very large lake that it was built next to, and the lake essentially disappeared somehow. It just drained away. And so there was a water problem, and they moved on. But the city is still standing there, or at least the palace quarter of the city is still standing there on this hill. It's called Fatehpur Sikri. 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 And it's just, as I say, it's an hour's journey outside Agra, so anybody who's going to see the Taj can easily go see it. And because so few people do go there, it's kind of, you're not entirely alone, but you feel like you're very alone there. It's a large site and there's not that many people. And it feels like a haunted city. It feels you could easily imagine yourself back into the past there. And it's very, very atmospheric. So I did go there. Spent a lot. I mean, I'd been there many times in my life, but I went there certainly for the book, yes, and I went to Italy as well. I have to say, Florence was less useful, except that the art was useful, because Florence has just changed more, and especially the center, the kind of historic center of Florence, is now so full of visitors that it's really very difficult to imagine them away and try and see 400 years ago. But the art is useful, because actually the great thing about the Renaissance painters was the way in which they filled the corners of the frame. If you look away from the subject of the painting in the middle, and you look at the corners, you see a man selling bread off a cart, or you see a butcher's shop, or people getting drunk in a bar. If you really want pictures of everyday life, they're there in Renaissance paintings, but they're in the corners. They're in the fringes of the picture. In the middle, there's some grand lady, like the Mona Lisa or whatever. But around the edges, there's all this little information about daily life, and that was really interesting. That was really interesting, because it gives you a picture. You see if people went out drinking, what sort of place did they go to? Here it is. If people were gambling, here's a gambling den. It's all there in the Uffizi and the Pitti and so on. But again, somebody was asking about the internet. I mean, one of the great resources is Uffizi Online, where you have a full catalogue of the Uffizi gallery available online. And you can literally go room by room in the Uffizi and look at the paintings on the walls and magnify them and look at details and so on. I mean, it's an amazing resource. And the British Museum has that too. I mean, a lot of the major museums now have these online facilities where you can look at the art. And of course, again, you can search Renaissance painting, 16th century, and it'll give you that catalogue, and then you can look at each of those pictures. So again, saves you a lot of plane fare. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.